What's up everyone, this is Willie and welcome back to another Total Drama video. And this time I'm doing the opposite of what I did in the last video where I'm looked through every season's best player. Now I'm going to be going through every season's worst player. So based on how I am assessing it, I'm looking at the players who make such actively bad mistakes in the game that would cost them their game. And it stems from how much they really sabotaged themselves in the spot that they weren't even supposed to go home. So there's that to consider. But anyways, now that's being said, I'll go through each season and look for the player who played the absolute worst. So beginning with Total Drama Island, and this one player really demonstrated a level of actively bad gameplay, which in itself is a testament to their lack of coherent knowledge coming into the game. And that player is clearly Ezekiel. Like, all he could have done was just sit back and zip it, and he wouldn't have been the boot. There was already a target on Courtney's back because she was partially to be blamed for the challenge loss, but Ezekiel wouldn't shut up with his misogynistic comments that he openly spewed the minute he talked about the gender breakdown on the tribe, which these sexist comments alone greatly sabotaged his positioning. And when confronted, he continued to double down as the more stronger females probed him, and at that point he did really no favors for himself afterwards, and because of that it made him an easy target and he would be sent home, which in itself is due to the factor that he was homeschooled. But at the same time, he should have read the room and recognized what his optimal strategy is, and knowing that his position was okay at a point, he should have just sat back and watched everything unfold instead of chipping in his sexist comments that would ultimately get him eliminated. Next up with Total Drama Action, and this might be a surprising pick, but for this player in particular, I felt like while they were not the first boot of their tribe, they were actively messing up their challenge wins for another player that was on an opposing tribe. And based on this description, I think you can already tell that I'm talking about Trent. Yeah, he did so much active wrong in this season because of his loving relationship with Gwen, and even then, what makes it more egregious is that Gwen would eventually break up with him because of that. And on top of that, to avoid being on the crossfire of what Trent has been doing, she literally begged his team to vote him out so that way she can avoid any association with Trent's schemes, and so they do. And whilst there's other players like Jeff and Bridget and Izzy who went home before him, I feel like for me their reasons are more so for reputation's sake, where Trent here didn't really have much of a bad reputation, but he just actively sabotaged his own game just for someone else, and for that person to end up being the reason he goes home is completely damning to Trent's game on this season. I don't think there's much to prop him up for despite surviving a couple rounds, but then again, he still played the game to what he thought was in his favor, turned out to be his biggest cost to the game, and even worse, not only his game but also his relationship too. Now we jump forward onto World Tour, and who do you think? I think it's pretty self-explanatory that once again, it's Ezekiel. Why? Because he just sucks. And to briefly disclose the reasonings, he would just brag about his potential redemption on his first return, but ultimately failed at everything he could to maintain his redeeming qualities, like even failing to sing a song properly. But the biggest knock against him is when he used the team's prop and fed to the alligators, which would cost his team immunity, and because of his actively bad actions, it made everyone take him out. And although reputation does play a factor into this, Ezekiel just had so many chances to just not progressing his bad reputation, and he just actively continued to do so. And seeing him get first boot again on his second season is now pretty telling to us that Ezekiel is probably one of the worst players in Total Drama ever, especially how he would just go home early on any given season he's on. So yeah, terrible player. Also annoyed host Chris as well, since his constant bragging almost got him kicked off the season to begin with, where Chris just threw him off the plane with the intention of abandoning him from being a part of the season, cementing how Ezekiel is just awful at everything. Next up, we're Revenge of the Island, and it's another decision that was pretty clear cut, where this player is someone who has a personality that doesn't gel well with the cast they're on, or even in any given cast they're on if I were to predict. And that person is Stacy, which everyone pretty much knows that she just wouldn't stop going on a spiel about her lies, which annoyed most of her tribe mates. And on top of that, it would just be her biggest priority when she first steps foot on the island, instead of trying to strategize, despite seeming to have a little bit of game sense. But then again, she just doesn't know how to demonstrate that, and instead focuses on something that would just put a bigger bullseye on her back, which she does, and that ultimately seals the deal that, yeah, Stacy just played this game all wrong this season, and compared to everyone else, there's no one else who's really on her level from this season, where she just stands alone in her own, which is the worst here. Now we go to Total Drama All-Stars, and this one now comes down to a pretty strange choice that I'm gonna make here, but it really stems from the fact that this player should not have been booted so early from their tribe, despite their reputation, but because of how horribly they competed, I think I have to select Lightning as the worst player this season, which Again, he should have not been the first boot from his tribe because he is such a strong competitor. Like, he's someone that would be able to help carry the tribe in challenges. However, Lightning just wouldn't stop making constant mistakes over and over again, just really sinking his relationship with his fellow villains on the team. It doesn't change the fact that there is sometimes that he just shows a lot of impulsiveness too. And yes, the fact that I think Lightning is worse than Lindsay this season is really egregious on his end, because the reason I would have Lindsay above him is because I don't put too much fault on players who are just weak in challenges and having somewhat strong bonds with people. Lightning just really didn't have much allies and was physically fit for the tribe, and the fact that they booted him first is a big indictment on his end, so that's why I picked him. To the following season, which is Pakatu Island, and it's another pretty easy choice. Or might as well say it really narrowed down to the first two boots, but ultimately I'm just gonna pick the first boot in Beardo, because seriously, what the hell was he even doing there? Except just making random noises, beatboxing like crazy. Okay, let's just get serious. Beardo was the kind of player that just annoyed his tribe mates, not really doing much or trying to be at least affable, instead just being a complete nuisance alongside Leonard. Where, truth be told, Beardo's got nothing to be desired, because by how he played, he simply just has no potential at all. And the fact that he goes home over Leonard, who is just on par as bad as him, gives you the signs that, yeah, Beardo is up for debate as one of the worst players ever. Does not have any sort of positive backing for him, eliminate in the first opportunity he can, and just prioritize rubbing his personality in front of everyone's faces, which doesn't gel with them, agitating them enough to send him home first. And now with that, we finally get to the reboot seasons, which, like I mentioned before, was a cast that's very heavy-handed with game body nature. But then again, the worst players from these seasons just show the least amount of merit to their game on these individual seasons. So let's start with the first reboot season, and this is a player who I do fault a lot for their elimination just because they actively ravaged their team's chances of winning, and that person is Axel, where I knock her solely because of the fact that she enacted friendly fire, where she intentionally kicked one of her own teammates in Ripper off of the ship, and that alone put a bullseye on her because her actions show that she's just not viable to work as a community, instead just work on her own interests, which can classify selfishness, and that does factor into why the team decided to eliminate her, because she openly made a self-interested decision that not only ultimately costed her team the win, even though I don't think Ripper would have done well in that challenge, but either way exposed her kind of characteristics that no one would want to work with moving forward, so that's why they ended up voting her out. And furthermore, the reason that I think she's more worse than Caleb, who was the first boot, is because, like I've said, I don't put too much fault for players who have a reputation coming into the game. While although Caleb is a newbie like everyone else, he does land in the kind of archetype of strong and very charismatic players who would make it far, and Bowie saw right through that and targeted him for it. Not really much of his active wrongdoing that caused his elimination, unlike Axel, who did do active wrong. So with that, that's why she's the worst player this season. And then surprisingly, the same thing with the second reboot season, where the worst player I'm selecting is the second boot, and this time it's Chase, where truth be told, his actions was prompted by Emma, but even then, he let it get to his head, and that's where the actively bad gameplay comes into effect. Where to emphasize, he was just too fixated on his content creating instead of participating in the challenge, which typically players who mainly cost the team the challenge are the ones booted, and Chase is just on par with that, but he just does it in an actively bad way where he just shows no willingness to even compete, unlike some who went home where they at least tried. There was effort to that. I would give Chase a grade of F for failure because he doesn't even try at all, prioritizing that camera time over the challenge win, especially when they were on a losing streak. And continue much further, I must give the reasons why I think Chase is worse than the first boot of the season, which was Scary Girl. Well, once again, it was due to reputation, which is different, where Scary Girl is obviously well known for her creepy personality, which doesn't sit well with any of her cast members. So it always felt like she was not destined to make it far because she had this background everyone was aware of. And yes, I will fault her for actively making her target level bigger when she spoke at the ceremony, but then again, it was Scary Girl. Everyone knew her background was desiring sinister and dark stuff, so through that reputation, I don't really think is much egregious compared to Chase, who should have been safe but kept messing it up for himself in this one round, and through that, I do think, yeah, it makes him pretty bad, so that's why I have him here as the worst. So that's it. those are the players who I think played the worst on their season, and feel free to comment down your opinions and even your takes on who you think is worst each season. I will continue to make more Total Drama content moving forward, like even doing a winner ranking, or even a video where I make my opinion on who I think was a preferable winner. Keep your eyes out for that. But anyways, I appreciate you all tuning in, and I'll see every one of you in the next video.